this is Mackenzie. Hey, this is Owen. Don't forget to like our show and subscribe.
If you want to continue the conversation from the show, check out our Facebook page at facebook.com/wearetheADHDfamily. Or if you're on Spotify, answer the poll question. The episode starts at 1 minute 15 seconds. Or just hit your fast forward button once or twice. Did you know that the last residential school in Canada closed in 1996? To learn more, go to nctr.ca and challenge yourself to go beyond a land acknowledgement. Welcome to We Are the ADHD Family podcast. This podcast is meant to chronicle our journey with ADHD, autism, and other discoveries along the way. I reach out to advocates, experts, individuals, and other families that want to raise their voices and empower those on their journey. My name is Mark Smeets. I am married to Siobhan, a parent to 2 wonderful kids, and all of us have ADHD. I want you to feel like you have power and hope. I'm trying to teach my parents' new dog, Boris. He's a corgi, to sit. And I wanted to test and see if my progress if I had made any progress. So I asked Mackenzie, can you ask Boris to S-I-T? And Mackenzie turns around and just goes, Boris, S-I-T. It was at that moment that I realized being literal runs in our family. I'm not going to lie. I am really, 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 really happy right now. It's going to be really hard to hide that in my voice. And instead of being subdued, I'm probably going to be pretty animated. You can't see it, but I know you can hear it coming through. And why is it that I'm so excited? Is it because that I got a really close parking spot to drop off the kids at school? That did happen this morning. And it's March 14th, by the way. Yes. That does make me super happy. Is it because our son is feeling better and we had a emergency trip to the ER, to the pediatric ER because he had an ear infection. And we came home at 2 o'clock the other day, 2 o'clock in the morning, that is. And he's on the mend and he's feeling good and he's happy again. Is that the reason? Yes, it is. Am I purposely keeping you in suspense, even though you've already seen the title of the episode that this is called? And yes, we got our results. From Sunny Hill. I'm very happy about this. And before I get into the results, I learned a lot yesterday morning, and specifically with our system here in BC education-wise, I see, this is something I didn't see before, but I really see it clearly now of how the way I think that a lot of teachers teach and the way that report cards are done are still missing the mark. It really honestly is. We're still doing the kids a disservice. And I love the fact that we have the proficiency system. That's fantastic. That's great. I think keep that. The letter grade system's complete waste at this point. But I know it's a whole other conversation. But what we're missing is ways to show when students are having problems and ways to track that, and effective ways to track that. And it's too hit and miss. So we're going to get to that part in a little bit, but let's talk about, you know what, the diagnoses. Swear, I feel like Oprah. You get a car. You get a car. You get a diagnosis. You get a diagnosis. Yeah, you're dyslexic. You're dyscalculia. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so I told you I'm in a good mood, and when I'm like this, I am. Yeah, I'm going to be like this for the rest of the day. It'd be really funny. I also had a much better sleep last night because just yesterday, after you come home at 2 and then you're up at like 6 or 6:30, you just feel like dirt. It sucks. Anyways, I've had an interesting 36 hours. And I'll make the joke I love making. See, I crack myself up on my own best comedian. I don't drink coffee. I think I've said this on the podcast before. So this is me without any coffee. this is what happens. I just can get really excited, and it's fun. Let's go. And I'll give you something else because I'm so excited. I guess this is an ADHD thing, and my brain is just, completely interested in doing this, and I shouldn't be. I actually have a big, massive pile of laundry to put away, but I'm so excited about this. I wanted to do this first. So here's one of the things that I learned first. The names like dyscalculia or dyslexia, these are quote unquote older terms. And it's what like in the case of dyslexia, letters jumbling around or words jumbling around. That's just one of the traits of dyslexia, one of the characteristics of it. There's a whole bunch of others, and that's another conversation for another day. But keep in mind, the correct term, as I found out yesterday, is it's specific learning disorder, or what they'll use the acronym of SLD, so specific learning disorder, SLD, in reading or in written expression, or in, I think dyscalculia is in SLD in mathematics. So everybody's using those terms, and it's interchangeable, but it's sort of the old term as opposed to, here's what they're calling it now. It's almost like, what ADD was used to diagnose the inattentive side of ADHD. And that was all there kind of was in the 80s. The ADHD meant to be for the hyperactive side, or hypoactive, I guess. But, now it's just ADHD with the 3 subtypes. This is no different. So he has his diagnosis officially he's got an SLD in reading and an SLD in written expression. He did not get the SLD in mathematics, but that's another conversation for later on. But you know what? Honestly, forget how I feel. He feels good. And I want to ask him a bunch of questions and kind of put that with this episode. And we saw his teacher yesterday. And the one thing his teacher said to him, which I loved, I adore his teacher, was that, you know what? Now you have a name that you can call these things. When you're frustrated, you're allowed to, but you can call this what this is. You're not guessing anymore. You know what the reason is, and that's got to be liberating. And just to weave out of Owen for 1 second, for me, this was really gratifying as a moment, because of all the struggles that I've had, especially in math and math reasoning, to hear Owen's frustrations being given a name, something that eluded me for all my life. I could only guess at certain things of why I was struggling with math, or why I was struggling with understanding English and grammar and things like that, or speaking. To hear Owen get something like this, it makes me feel so good that he has the power to call it what it is. How he goes forward in his life and works through those things, total other issue, but we can call it something, and that's really good. We're so incredibly proud of him. I know he sees his life different than I saw my life at his age. And I think my wife would say the same thing. There's this awareness of calling out how awesome he is and what his strengths really are and how we can leverage those strengths. Notice how I didn't say, what his strengths and weaknesses are. Yeah, we've all got a weakness in something, whatever. But it's enough talking about that. It's enough talking about what you don't have. This is what he does have and how fantastic it is. As I go through this episode, there is one thing I want you to keep in mind, which is really important. It may not make sense right away. Why a diagnosis is important is, honestly, if you don't know that you're dyslexic, for example, okay, and you have tools to help you bridge those gaps and meet those challenges where you need them, that doesn't mean you're not dyslexic. If you're using those tools to keep up with the class and you're making the grades, it doesn't take away from the diagnosis. It doesn't mean that you're not dyslexic or you're not autistic or you're not an ADHD or something like that. It doesn't. But the problem is that in the system that we have, and this is what I see here in BC a lot of, and I see it in other places too, when we have to tie it to a diagnosis, because if we don't, we're using that lack of diagnosis and this quote unquote needs-based to deny people services that they're rightfully owed. And that's a huge, 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 massive problem. So I'm going to try and stop digressing and sidetracking on these things, and let's get into the actual experience part. We met over Zoom, and basically he started off by recapping what we did with Owen and the extra results and tests that they were able to get. You know, when we met in person, and I kind of mentioned this on a previous episode, I felt like he was dancing around a little bit and not saying, "It is this," which always bugs me. I find that very hard to deal with. And the really nice part was when I sort of called this out, there was a point where I said, "So he's dyslexic." And that's when he taught me about the language use and how, even though they say, like the DSM will say, specific learning disorder in reading or written expression, whatever, that phrase is synonymous, meaning it's very similar to dyslexia, and dyslexia is just the older term. But I feel like once we hit that, it was like boom, everything sort of opened up, and that part was really, really cool. From what was supposed to be just a meeting that he thought, "Hey, you schedule an hour for these things." Yeah, we went for like an hour and a half almost. And we just kept asking, both my wife and I just asked question after question. The one thing I won't get into, because I'm not good with this side of it, and I remember from Owen's original autism assessment that when they're saying, when the papers are written and they're saying, you know what, he's in the upper percentile of this percentile, like that's where my brain hurts. So I'm going to try not to talk about any of that stuff. It's not gobbledygook. It's not that. It's just there's no point. The thinking assessment that they did, which I don't know too much about. I need to wait for the report to read it in full. But holding that information and working memory, trying to hold information in your head, or what we know is working memory rather, and the processing speed, that was talked about. And I know that is an ADHD trait as well. But I found it interesting that was sort of the thing that they opened with, and there was nothing that ended up happening for that as far as the diagnosis goes. I think that's just really looking at, if you can hold the information and hold it for a length of time, as long as it's not severely impacted like other things, I guess, then you avoid that sort of diagnosis piece. Going over on the reading learning disorder side of things like where he'll struggle is piecing together how different sounds go together. As he's trying to piece out some of these words and decode these words, sometimes the meaning of the paragraph, those are some of the factors that contributed to the diagnosis. And it made perfect sense with everything that we've seen. Even for me, I know when I sit there and I think about it in this context, it's like, yeah, I will struggle with certain things, not so much of how things are sounding, but just what it actually means. I know for the holding information, working memory, and the processing speed, for me, that's, yeah, that can be a struggle. Yeah, yay me. For the specific learning disorder in the written expression, which would be known as dysgraphia, I guess things like spelling, the letter number reversals, having a hard time to produce written content, or developing and putting ideas together. So that was a huge one because I've said this before, I know my kid's a smart kid. I know both my kids are smart kids. And to find a medium that helps to get those ideas out, the only way that I can explain this is in my own words, which is I feel like I kind of had two brains. I have my speaking brain, which I'm using right now, and I have my writing brain. And the two feel very separated. Sometimes they line up and are fantastic because, I can sit there and produce this kind of stuff. But of course, I'm using notes and things like that. If I was to try and produce something from my writing voice, like the planets have to align for me to be able to do this. Seeing how Owen and even Mackenzie has gone through this stuff, that makes perfect sense. It really honestly does. He's got all the, he's got these ideas, but, how do you bring them to fruition? What can we use to help guide him to do it? Hey, I want to build this Lego tower. And then the motivation all of a sudden is gone. Or I want to write a comic book or create a comic book. And you're getting, if you didn't have the motivation hill of actually just trying to be able to do something like that, and you wanted to try and do it, well, it's not good. It may not match what's in your mind because you don't necessarily have the skills to draw like, whatever a comic book artist might do. It might not look as good as what Stan Lee did. That goes with writing as well. Trying to get those ideas out and to put them onto paper. Well, instead, maybe voice to text is a way to sit there and do those things. It's a way to develop those connections that he has to work. On the math side of things, this is where it got really interesting. He didn't get the specific learning disorder in math, or I guess what we would know as dyscalculia, but I think he was calling it math reasoning, which hit me like a ton of bricks. And basically, he didn't meet the criteria at this time. The reason he didn't meet the criteria was because, and I'll paraphrase lightly, was that there isn't enough data being in air quotes. So the school report card doesn't mention math challenges nearly as much as other things. The school hasn't identified that he needs the remediation in math. I took issue with that, and that actually got me a little upset because we know there are math struggles. We know that's there, but pushing this down the road to something else that we have to now go after. There was something where he had said, you know what, if there is that learning disorder there, it's going to show up. We should see it emerge. I'm saying it's there, right? This is no different than what we've already gone through for everything else, right? Whether it's reading, writing, you name it. My issue was this. My big issue was this. If you figured out a bunch of tools and you can keep up with the grades and the class work, it doesn't mean that you don't have a learning disability. And I think that's what we're seeing here, because he was able to keep up and because he has figured out that, hey, that he is dyslexic and things and letters and words and stuff jump around and the numbers reverse, that he's figured out some tools and some ways to bridge certain gaps. It doesn't take away. That shouldn't take away from him. So I think when he's doing those tests and stuff, he's probably using a bunch of tricks he's picked up or memorization. And I wondered about that specifically. And I remember asking Owen at one point if he had memorized certain things. And he basically said, he basically said yes to that, but he really couldn't give me any examples. And just to give you one example, just for me off the top of my head, one way that I remember 6 times 8 is 48 is because it rhymes. That's it. It's not that it's 8 groups of 6 or 6 groups of 8, whatever. But I remember that it rhymes. 6 times 4 is 24. Again, another one that rhymes. So there's one of my strategies, rhyming. I have to look for those kind of things with him as well. And that's what irked me on on this piece because it felt like it was kind of being passed over. Like, oh, just come revisit it again. Like, really, buddy? We waited all this time and now this? Fine, whatever. That's what sort of got me annoyed. One thing I would recommend any parent to do this, a lot of teachers have comments that they write on the report cards. And there's a section for the parent's reply. At least these are the report cards here in BC. What I have been doing for years now is there isn't enough to handwrite any space on this. So I always email the teacher and I just kind of dump as many thoughts as I can of where I see the struggles and all that kind of stuff. It's easier for me to do that than it is to handwrite everything. And I guess, there is an acknowledgement from the teacher, at least the teachers that we've had to work with, in terms of all the things that we've seen, and that part's been good. And maybe this is really a case of one thing's been sort of not left aside or put aside, not like that. It's not been on purpose. It's just been more of an accident than anything else. I think that's where the advice I have is to, number one, put it in an email, document it. And I wonder if I was to go through my letters that I've sent before, I wonder what I would find and see, specific things of the like call out. Because then it's easy enough to go back to this person and just say to them, look, here's information. You were reading some report cards. Here's other information that we wrote back, outlining our concerns. Be sure that you're keeping your own paper trail of things. And at least then you can show the frequency of which you raised something. Because when you are talking to that psychologist or whatever party, when you're doing that psych ed, then you can say, look, I've raised this before. I raised this here, 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 and here. It's not going away. Or even if it does go away, why has it gone away? I think that's it's another question to ask too, especially given the fact that if you do have tools that can mask a lot of these traits, how do you break through those and know that it's something that it's part of something bigger, so to speak. I have gone on enough about this. Yesterday we had celebratory cake, and that was absolutely worth it, and very, very delicious chocolate cake. Quite honestly, if you or your child get your own diagnoses, go get cake, go celebrate, and don't leave it. Don't be afraid or ashamed that you now have a name. Be proud that you've got a name to call it. It's pretty awesome. I hope you've learned something from this and just kind of hearing our experience. And I'll do an Owen-centered episode of questions for him later. Already gone on long enough. I think this thing's going to be like within the range that I want it to be. But wherever you are in the world, have yourself a good night, good day, good morning. Keep fighting. Be proud that you are that parent or you are that advocate. And keep speaking up for others and doing your thing. All right?
Thank you for listening to our show.
If you're hearing this message, you've reached the end of the episode, and for that, I want to say thank you. I hope you have enjoyed what you've heard and are walking away with newfound knowledge.
We are the ADHD family.
See you soon for a new episode. If you want to be a guest on the show or know someone who would make a great guest, contact me through our Facebook page. This podcast is open to everyone. You don't need to be an expert, just passionate and want to see change. The opinions expressed by the host and guest are not associated with any employer or organization unless otherwise stated.